The dirt-caked window of the auction house couldn't hide the cruel scene unfolding inside as Winifred Johnson stood on the makeshift platform, her trembling hands clasped tightly before her, tears threatening to spill from her eyes as the auctioneer called for bids on her contract of servitude, a polite term for what everyone in Willow Creek, New Mexico territory knew was barely disguised slavery in this year of 1875. $500 for this fine young woman. Educated, can read and write, keeps a fine house. Who'll give me 500? The auctioneer's voice boomed through the crowded room, filled with the scent of tobacco, whiskey, and unwashed bodies. Men eyed her like cattle, some with gazes that made her skin crawl, others with detached calculation as if assessing a work animal. Winifred, 20 years old, and having never ventured beyond the boundaries of Willow Creek until now, stared at the floor, unable to meet the hungry eyes of the bidders. Just days ago, she had been the dutiful daughter of Gerald Johnson, a once respected merchant whose gambling debts had finally caught up with him. After his sudden death from apoplexy when confronted by his creditors, those same men had claimed her as an asset to be liquidated. Do I hear 500? $500 for 6 years of service from this healthy young woman? The auctioneer's voice grew more desperate as the silence stretched uncomfortably. 300, called a gravelly voice from the back. Winifred recognized it. Hiram Weathers, the owner of the saloon who was known to work his serving girls half to death, expecting additional services that made respectable women cross the street rather than pass his establishment. 350, came another voice, this one belonging to the elderly widower who lived on the edge of town and was looking for his 4th wife. 400, Hiram countered. Winifred bit her lip until she tasted blood. Her father's body wasn't even cold in the ground, and here she stood, being sold to pay his debts. Debts she hadn't even known existed until the sheriff and creditors arrived at her door yesterday morning. $500. The new voice cut through the murmurs like a knife. It was deep, steady, carrying an authority that made the room fall silent. Winifred raised her eyes to see a tall figure standing at the entrance, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, shoulders broad beneath a dust-covered duster coat. 500 from the gentleman at the door. Do I hear 550? The auctioneer's excitement was palpable. Hiram Weathers turned in his chair, scowling at the newcomer. 550, he spat. 600, came the immediate response from the stranger who hadn't moved from his position by the door. 650. Hiram's face was turning red. 800. The stranger's voice remained calm. A hush fell over the crowd. $800 was a small fortune in Willow Creek. 800 going once. The auctioneer could barely contain his glee at the unexpected bidding war. Going twice. 900. Hiram stood now, his jowls quivering with rage. $1,000. The stranger finally stepped forward, and as he moved into the light, Winifred could see him clearly for the first time. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the sun. His eyes were a startling blue against his tanned skin, and there was something in them, not the hunger or calculation she'd seen in others, but something she couldn't quite name. $1,000 going once, going twice, sold to Mr. The auctioneer looked questioningly at the stranger. Foster James, the man said, reaching into his coat to pull out a leather pouch. I'll pay now. As the transaction was completed, Winifred stood frozen, uncertain of her fate. She had been sold to a man she had never seen before, a man who had spent $1,000 for her. What would he expect in return? Foster James turned toward her, and for the first time their eyes met directly. Miss Johnson, he said with a slight nod, gather your belongings. We'll be leaving immediately." His tone left no room for argument, but it wasn't cruel. Still, Winifred felt fear clawing at her throat as she was led from the platform to the small anteroom where her single carpetbag waited, containing all that remained of her former life. When she emerged, the stranger, her new owner, she reminded herself bitterly, was waiting, his expression unreadable. Without a word, he took her bag and guided her outside with a light touch on her elbow. A magnificent chestnut stallion stood hitched outside, alongside a more modest mare. "The brown one's yours," he said, nodding toward the mare. "Can you ride?" Winifred nodded mutely. Her father had taught her as a child, though it had been years since she'd been on horseback. "Good. It's a long journey to my ranch. We'll need to make it to truth or consequences by nightfall." As she mounted the mare with as much dignity as she could muster, Winifred finally found her voice. "Sir Mr. James, what will be expected of me?" Foster James looked at her, his expression softening slightly. "For now, just to ride. We'll talk about the rest later." With that, he swung onto his own mount and led them away from Willow Creek, away from everything Winifred had ever known, toward an uncertain future with a man who had bought her freedom, or perhaps just changed her prison. They rode in silence for the first hour, Winifred struggling to keep her emotions in check as the reality of her situation settled over her like a heavy blanket. The New Mexico landscape stretched endlessly around them, beautiful in its harsh way, with red rock formations rising against the brilliant blue sky and scrub brush dotting the dusty terrain. "We'll stop up ahead to water the horses," Foster finally said, breaking the silence. "There's a creek just beyond that ridge." Winifred nodded, not trusting her voice. Her body ached from the unaccustomed riding, but she refused to complain. What right did she have? She was property now, purchased and paid for. When they reached the creek, Foster dismounted in one fluid motion and came around to help her down. His hands were strong as they circled her waist, but he released her immediately once her feet touched the ground. "There's jerky and hardtack in my saddlebag," he said, gesturing toward his horse. "Help yourself." As Winifred moved to retrieve the food, she studied him from the corner of her eye. He was tending to the horses, his movements efficient and gentle with the animals. That was something, at least. A man who was kind to his horses might be kind to a woman. Or not, she reminded herself harshly. She knew nothing about this man except that he had paid $1,000 for her servitude. "Mr. James," she said finally, gathering her courage as they sat on rocks by the creek, chewing the tough jerky. "I believe I have the right to know what you intend for me." Foster looked at her for a long moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. "You're right," he said eventually. "You do deserve to know." He set aside his food and faced her directly. "Miss Johnson, I bought your contract to keep you out of Hiram Weathers' hands, what he does to women." He shook his head. "No one deserves that fate, but I have no intention of holding you to any contract." Winifred stared at him, unable to comprehend his words. "What do you mean?" "I mean that as far as I'm concerned, you're a free woman. I have a large ranch near truth or consequences. I can offer you employment, proper employment with wages as a housekeeper. Or, if you prefer, I can give you enough money to make a fresh start elsewhere. The choice is yours." Disbelief warred with hope in Winifred's chest. "Why would you do this? You spent $1,000. A shadow passed over Foster's face. "Let's just say I have my reasons for despising men who trade in human lives." Before Winifred could press further, he stood, brushing dust from his trousers. "We should keep moving if we want to reach town by nightfall. You can give me your decision once we arrive at the ranch." They continued their journey, but the air between them had changed. Winifred studied his broad back as he rode ahead of her, trying to understand this man who had spent a fortune to free a stranger. There had to be more to his story, but for now, the faint flicker of hope in her chest was enough to sustain her. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the town of Truth or Consequences came into view in the valley below. It was larger than Willow Creek, with proper streets and buildings constructed of brick rather than just wood. "We'll stay at the hotel tonight," Foster said as they rode into town. "My ranch is another hour's ride, but it's best not to travel these roads after dark." The Golden Spur Hotel was the most respectable establishment in town, and Winifred felt acutely aware of her travel-worn appearance as Foster led her into the lobby. The clerk eyed them curiously, but said nothing as Foster requested 2 separate rooms. "2 of your finest rooms, Arthur," Foster said, and Winifred noted that the clerk seemed to know him. "Of course, Mr. James. Will you be joining us for dinner in the dining room?" "Yes, in 1 hour. Please have baths sent up to both rooms." As they climbed the stairs, Winifred clutching her meager carpetbag, she finally voiced the question that had been burning in her mind. "Mr. James, how can you afford all this? The hotel rooms?" Foster gave her a small, enigmatic smile. "Cattle, Miss Johnson. My father built one of the largest spreads in the territory, and I've expanded it further. The James Ranch runs from here nearly to the mountains." He stopped at a door and unlocked it, handing her the key. "This is your room. I'm next door if you need anything. Dinner in 1 hour." Left alone in a hotel room nicer than any she had ever stayed in, Winifred sank onto the bed, her mind reeling. Freedom had been snatched away and then, impossibly, offered back to her in the span of a single day. Could she trust this stranger's word? Did she have any choice? When the promised bath arrived, she sank into the hot water gratefully, scrubbing away the dust of travel and the humiliation of the auction block. As she dressed in the cleanest of her simple dresses, she studied her reflection in the mirror. Her dark blonde hair was neatly pinned up, and her brown eyes looked back at her with new determination. Whatever Foster James's true intentions, she would face them with dignity. When she descended to the dining room, she found him waiting, dressed in a clean shirt and vest, his usually windswept hair combed back. He rose when he saw her, pulling out her chair with a courtesy that surprised her. "You look refreshed, Miss Johnson," he said as they settled at the table. "Thank you for the bath, Mr. James. And the room." A waiter appeared with menus and Foster ordered for both of them after a questioning look at Winifred, who nodded her assent, overwhelmed by the selections. "Tell me about yourself," Foster said once they were alone again. "Beyond what little I know that you're Gerald Johnson's daughter." Winifred tensed at her father's name. "There's not much to tell. My mother died when I was 12. I've kept house for my father since then. He wasn't always as he was at the end." She twisted her napkin in her lap. "The gambling only got bad in the last few years. And you had no other family to turn to?" "None. My mother's family disowned her when she married my father. They thought he was beneath them." She gave a bitter laugh. "I suppose they were right in the end." Foster's expression darkened. "No man has the right to wager away another person's freedom, family or not." Something in his vehemence made Winifred look at him more closely. "You speak as if from experience, Mr. James." He met her gaze steadily. "Let's just say I've seen the worst of what people can do to one another in the name of debt and obligation." Before she could probe further, their food arrived, the finest steak Winifred had tasted in years, with potatoes and fresh vegetables that must have cost a small fortune in this remote town. She ate hungrily, realizing she hadn't had a proper meal since before her father's death. "You've decided to come to the ranch, then?" Foster asked as they finished their meal. Winifred set down her fork carefully. "I'm not sure I have many options, Mr. James." You say I'm free, but I have no money, no family, nowhere to go. You could stay here in town. There's a seamstress looking for help. I could arrange it." The offer seemed sincere, yet Winifred found herself hesitating. "Why are you doing this, being kind to me?" Foster was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "When I was a boy, my father bought a woman's contract to settle a debt. Maria was her name. She was Mexican, educated, from a good family that had fallen on hard times." His jaw tightened. "My father was not a kind man. Maria lasted 2 years before she couldn't take it anymore." The implication hung heavy between them. "I swore then that I would never be like him," Foster continued, his voice low. "When I heard about the auction in Willow Creek, I knew I had to intervene." Winifred felt a chill despite the warm room. "I'm sorry about Maria, as am I, every day." He looked at her directly. "So now you know. I'm offering you a position because it's the right thing to do, not out of any expectation." In that moment, studying his earnest face, Winifred made her decision. "I'll come to the ranch, Mr. James, as your housekeeper with proper wages, as you said." Relief flickered across his features. "Good. We'll leave after breakfast tomorrow." He stood, signaling the end of their conversation. "Rest well, Miss Johnson." As he escorted her back to her room, Winifred felt a curious mixture of trepidation and something else, perhaps the first stirring of hope since her father's death. Whatever awaited her at the James Ranch, she sensed it would be better than the fate she had narrowly escaped. Morning came with golden lights spilling through the curtains of her hotel room. For a disorienting moment, Winifred forgot where she was, expecting to see the familiar walls of her childhood home. Reality rushed back as she sat up, remembering the auction, the long ride, and the strange, contradictory man who had purchased her freedom only to give it back. After dressing in her second-best dress, saving her best for their arrival at the ranch, she met Foster for breakfast in the hotel dining room. He was already there, studying a newspaper, but stood when she approached. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, folding the paper away. "Better than I expected," she admitted, taking the seat he offered. They ate in companionable silence, Foster occasionally commenting on news from the paper, a new railroad line being planned, territorial politics, cattle prices. It was surprisingly normal, this breakfast with a man who was neither family nor fiancé, yet with whom her future was now entangled. As they prepared to leave, the hotel clerk handed Foster a sealed envelope. "Telegram came for you last night, Mr. James." Foster read it quickly, his expression darkening. "Change of plans," he said to Winifred as they walked toward their horses. "We need to ride directly to the ranch. There's been some trouble with rustlers." The ride to the James Ranch took them through increasingly beautiful country, the terrain rising as they approached the foothills. Cottonwoods lined the streams they crossed, offering welcome shade, while in the distance, mountains rose blue against the horizon. "That's the eastern boundary," Foster said, pointing to a fence line in the distance. "The ranch house is another 20 minutes' ride." When they crested the next hill, Winifred caught her breath. Below them stretched a verdant valley, dotted with grazing cattle. A large, well-maintained ranch house of stone and timber stood near a creek, surrounded by cottonwoods and several outbuildings. A bunkhouse, barn, and corrals completed the scene. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. Foster's face softened with pride. "My father built the small cabin that used to stand here. I built this house 5 years ago, wanted something that would last generations." As they rode into the yard, several cowboys looked up from their work, raising hands in greeting to Foster. An older Mexican woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mrs. Alvarez," Foster called, dismounting and going to help Winifred down. "This is Miss Johnson. She'll be taking over as housekeeper." The woman nodded, her dark eyes assessing Winifred frankly. "Welcome, señorita. The house, it needs a woman's touch." She turned to Foster. "Señor Tyler is waiting in your office. He says it is urgent." Foster frowned. "Show Miss Johnson to the housekeeper's room, please. I'll be in shortly." With a brief nod to Winifred, he strode toward the house. Mrs. Alvarez, who introduced herself as Alina, led Winifred through the ranch house. It was larger than it had appeared from outside, with a grand central staircase, a spacious kitchen, formal dining room, and several bedrooms upstairs. "The master never married," Alina explained as they climbed the stairs. "His room is at the end of the hall. Yours is here, next to mine." She opened a door to reveal a pleasant chamber with a comfortable bed, dresser, and a small sitting area near the window, which overlooked the garden and corrals. "It's lovely," Winifred said, genuinely surprised by the accommodations. "Señor James, he is a good man," Alina said, her voice softening. "Treats his people fair, not like his father." She crossed herself. "You are lucky he found you, señorita. Many men in these parts, they are not so honorable." After helping Winifred unpack her few belongings, Alina showed her the rest of the house, explaining the daily routines and introducing her to the cook, a cheerful half-Mexican, half-Irish man named Miguel O'Brien, who ruled the kitchen with good-natured authority. "So you're to be the new housekeeper," he said, looking her up and down. "Good. The boss needs someone to make this place a proper home. Been telling him that for years." Winifred was still trying to absorb all the information when Foster found her in the kitchen, his face grim. "Miss Johnson, I apologize for abandoning you, but there's a situation I need to handle. Rustlers hit the north pasture last night. 20 head of prime breeding stock gone." "I'm so sorry," Winifred said, seeing the tension in his shoulders. "I need to ride out with the men." "May be gone overnight." He hesitated, then added, "Make yourself at home. Mrs. Alvarez will help you get settled." After he left, Winifred spent the afternoon familiarizing herself with the house, taking inventory of linens, china, and silverware, and making notes about what needed attention. The house was well built and solidly furnished, but lacked the small touches that made a house a home. Curtains were functional rather than decorative, walls were bare of art, and there were few comfortable places to sit and read or so. By evening, she had formulated a plan for improvements, assuming Foster would approve the modest expenses involved. Alina seemed pleased with her initiative, nodding approvingly as Winifred shared her ideas over dinner. "The señor, he will like these changes, I think," Alina said. "He builds this big house but does not know how to make it warm." That night, lying in her new bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling for the night, Winifred reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. Just 2 days ago, she had been facing a life of servitude to a cruel master. Now she had a position, a room of her own, and the beginning of respect from the household staff. And then, there was Foster James himself, a contradiction of strength and gentleness, wealth and simplicity, whose kindness to her stemmed from a tragedy in his past. She found herself curious about him in a way that went beyond gratitude, and the realization made her cheeks warm in the darkness. "Don't be foolish," she whispered to herself. "He's your employer, nothing more." But as she drifted toward sleep, it was his blue eyes and rare smile that followed her into dreams. Foster and his men returned late the following afternoon, dusty and grim-faced. From the window of the parlor she was cleaning, Winifred watched them ride in, noting how the cowboys deferred to Foster despite his obvious fatigue. He moved with purpose, issuing instructions even as he dismounted, his authority unquestioned. She busied herself with her work, not wanting to appear to be prying. But when Miguel called everyone for the evening meal, she joined the household in the large kitchen where the ranch hands and house staff ate together. Foster entered last, his hair damp from washing, wearing a clean shirt. He paused momentarily when he saw Winifred, then nodded and took his seat at the head of the table. The meal was served family style, with platters of roast beef, potatoes, and beans passed around. "Any luck with the rustlers, boss?" asked a weathered cowboy named Pete. Foster shook his head. "Tracked them to the ravine, but lost the trail where they crossed the river. Tyler's gone to alert the marshal, but I don't expect much help. They're stretched thin as it is." The conversation turned to ranch business, fences needing repair, a mare about to foal, plans for the fall roundup. Winifred ate quietly, observing the easy camaraderie among the ranch hands and Foster's thoughtful leadership style. After dinner, as the men drifted toward the bunkhouse and the kitchen staff cleaned up, Foster approached Winifred. "Would you join me in my office, Miss Johnson? I'd like to discuss your duties and wages." His office was a cozy room lined with bookshelves, a sturdy desk positioned to look out over the ranch yard. He gestured for her to sit in one of two leather chairs facing the desk, then surprised her by taking the other rather than sitting behind the desk. "Mrs. Alvarez tells me you've already begun making improvements," he said. "I appreciate your initiative." "Thank you, Mr. James. I hope I haven't overstepped." "Not at all. This place could use a woman's touch." He cleared his throat. "Now, about your position. Standard wages for a housekeeper of your qualifications would be $30 a month plus room and board. However, given the unusual circumstances of your arrival, I'm prepared to offer 45. Winifred's eyes widened. It was a generous salary, more than she had ever earned or expected to earn. "That's very kind, Mr. James, but unnecessary. The standard wage is fair." He shook his head. "I insist. Consider it compensation for the ordeal you've endured." He leaned forward slightly. "I want to be clear, Miss Johnson. You are an employee here, not a servant or anything else. You'll have Sundays free and one additional day each month. If the position doesn't suit you, you're free to leave with a good reference and 2 months' wages." Winifred studied him, trying to understand this man who seemed determined to give her every advantage. "You're very generous, Mr. James. Foster, please, at least when it's just the household." "Then you must call me Winifred." A smile touched his lips, warming his features. "Winifred, it suits you." An unexpected flutter in her stomach made her look away, suddenly self-conscious. "Is there anything specific you'd like me to focus on first?" "The house is well maintained, but there are areas that could be more comfortable." Foster waved a hand. "Do as you see fit. I trust your judgment." He hesitated, then added, "My mother loved beautiful things. She had plans for this valley for a grand house with gardens. My father—" His expression hardened. He had different priorities. Winifred sensed there was much more to that story but didn't press. "Well, I won't promise gardens just yet, but perhaps some curtains that aren't purely functional might be a start." That earned her another smile. "I'll arrange for you to have an account at the general store in town. Order whatever you need." They spoke a while longer about the household schedule and staff, and Winifred found herself relaxing in his company. There was an ease to their conversation that surprised her, given their short acquaintance and the power imbalance between them. When she finally rose to leave, Foster stood as well. "One more thing," he said. "There's a social at the church in town this Saturday. The ranch usually makes an appearance. Would you care to accompany me? It would be a good opportunity for you to meet people." The invitation caught her off guard. "As your housekeeper," something flickered in his eyes. "As yourself, Winifred." as a new resident of Truth or Consequences who happens to work at the James Ranch. She should refuse, she knew. It was too soon after her father's death for social engagements, and attending with Foster might give people the wrong impression. And yet, I would like that, she heard herself say. Thank you. His smile was worth any potential gossip. Good, we'll ride in Saturday afternoon. He walked her to the door, and for a breathless moment Winifred thought he might take her hand. Instead, he simply nodded. Good night, Winifred. Good night, Foster. As she made her way to her room, Winifred scolded herself for the disappointment she felt. Foster James was her employer, her rescuer, perhaps in time her friend, but nothing more. The sooner she remembered that, the better. The next few days fell into a pleasant rhythm as Winifred settled into her role as housekeeper. She rose early, breakfasting with the staff before Foster and the ranch hands rode out for the day. Mornings were spent directing the cleaning of rooms, checking inventory, and planning meals with Miguel. Afternoons were often devoted to her own projects, mending linens, ordering supplies from town, and making sketches for improvements to the house. Foster was frequently absent, busy with ranch work, but when their paths crossed, Winifred found herself looking forward to their conversations. He was well-read, with opinions on everything from politics to literature, and seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts. On Thursday, a wagon arrived from town with supplies. She had ordered fabric for curtains, a few pieces of decorative pottery, and some flowering plants for the barren entryway. Foster found her in the parlor that evening, measuring windows for curtains. I see the transformation has begun, he said, leaning against the door frame. Winifred turned, surprised to find him watching her with what looked like admiration. Just small changes. The bones of the house are excellent. My mother would have liked you, he said unexpectedly. She had an eye for beauty too. Tell me about her, Winifred said, setting aside her measuring tape. Foster was quiet for a moment, and she wondered if she'd overstepped. Then he moved into the room, taking a seat in one of the straight-back chairs. She was Eastern, Philadelphia society. Met my father when he went east to secure investors for his cattle operation. He was handsome, charming when he wanted to be, with tales of adventure in the West. His mouth twisted. She was barely 20, had no idea what she was getting into. Was she unhappy here? She tried not to be, made the best of it, taught me to read, to appreciate music and art. He looked around the room. She died when I was 15, fever. I'm sorry, Winifred said softly. My mother died when I was 12. It changes you, losing a mother so young. Foster met her eyes, and for a moment, a current of shared understanding passed between them. Yes, he said simply. It does. The moment stretched, intimate in its shared grief, until Foster cleared his throat. I received word today. The marshal caught one of the rustlers, a young fool who got separated from the others. Says the gang is headed north toward Colorado. Winifred welcomed the change of subject. That's good news, isn't it? Partial good news. We won't get the cattle back, but at least they're leaving our territory. He stood. I should let you get back to your work. Foster, she said impulsively as he turned to go, would you join me for tea? I've just made a fresh pot. He looked surprised, then pleased. I'd like that. They sat in the kitchen, the homey space more comfortable than the formal parlor, sharing tea and conversation as the sun set outside, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was a simple moment, unremarkable really, but as Winifred went to bed that night, she realized it had been one of the most contented evenings she'd spent in years. Saturday dawned clear and warm, perfect weather for the church social. Winifred spent extra time on her appearance, wearing her best dress, a sky blue cotton with white trim that her mother had sewn for her 18th birthday. She pinned her hair up in a style slightly more elaborate than her usual practical arrangement, and even added a touch of her mother's old rose water to her wrists. "You look lovely," Alina said approvingly when Winifred came downstairs. "The blue, it matches your eyes." "Thank you," Winifred said, feeling unaccountably nervous. "Is Mr. James ready?" "Outside with the buggy," Alina replied, a knowing smile playing at her lips that Winifred chose to ignore. Foster was indeed waiting, the ranch's best buggy hitched to a pair of matching bays. He wore a dark suit and had trimmed his beard, looking every inch the prosperous rancher. When he saw Winifred, he removed his hat, a gesture of respect that made her cheeks warm. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." The words slipped out before she could think better of them. His smile widened as he helped her into the buggy, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The ride into Truth or Consequences took just under an hour, giving Winifred time to admire the scenery, and for Foster to point out landmarks, the best fishing spot on the creek, the ridge where wild horses sometimes gathered, the distant mountains where he hunted elk in the fall. The town was bustling with activity as they arrived, the church grounds decorated with bunting and tables laden with food. Women in their best dresses chatted in groups, while men discussed cattle prices and politics. Children ran between the adults, playing tag and other games. "Foster James, as I live and breathe." A middle-aged woman approached as Foster helped Winifred down from the buggy. "We hardly see you in town these days except for business." "Mrs. Porter," Foster said, tipping his hat. "May I introduce Miss Winifred Johnson, my new housekeeper, Mrs." Porter's eyebrows rose slightly as she took in Winifred's appearance and the fact that Foster had brought her to the social. "Miss Johnson, welcome to Truth or Consequences. I'm Beatrice Porter, the pastor's wife. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Porter," Winifred said, suddenly aware of the curious glances being cast their way. "Miss Johnson recently arrived from Willow Creek," Foster added smoothly. "I thought the social would be a good opportunity for her to meet people." "How thoughtful, Mrs. Porter said, her tone suggesting she found it more than thoughtful. "Well, come along, Miss Johnson. Let me introduce you to some of the ladies while Mr. James catches up with the men." Winifred glanced at Foster, who gave her an encouraging nod. "I'll find you later," he promised. The next hour was a whirlwind of introductions as Mrs. Porter led her from group to group. Most of the women were friendly, if curious, about the new arrival at the James Ranch. A few, particularly the unmarried ones, were less welcoming, eyeing her with suspicion. "So you're living at the ranch already?" asked a pretty young woman named Clara Wilson, her voice carrying just enough edge to make her disapproval clear. "Yes, as the housekeeper," Winifred replied evenly. "Mrs. Alvarez and Miguel have been very welcoming." "How fortunate for you," Clara said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Foster James is quite the catch. Half the women in the county have set their caps for him." Before Winifred could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal her own confused feelings, a call went up for everyone to gather for the picnic lunch. She found Foster waiting for her near the food tables, 2 plates in hand. "I took the liberty," he said, handing her one loaded with fried chicken, potato salad, and fresh bread. "Miguel would never forgive me if I let you eat Mrs. Wilkins' chicken instead of his." Winifred laughed, grateful for his easy manner after the tense conversation with Clara. "He does take great pride in his cooking." They found seats at one of the long tables, joined by a friendly older couple Foster introduced as the Hendersons, who owned the neighboring ranch. As they ate, Winifred gradually relaxed, enjoying the food and company. Foster was different here, more formal in some ways, clearly aware of his position as one of the area's most prosperous ranchers. but also more openly attentive to her, making sure she was included in conversations and had everything she needed. After lunch came dancing, with a small band of local musicians setting up under a grove of cottonwoods. Foster stood, offering Winifred his hand. "Would you honor me with a dance, Miss Johnson?" The proper response would be to decline. She was still in mourning for her father, after all, and dancing with her employer would only fuel the gossip she'd already detected. But the warmth in Foster's blue eyes and the hopeful set of his mouth made propriety seem suddenly less important. "I'd be delighted, Mr. James," she said, placing her hand in his. The musician struck up a lively reel, and Foster led her into the set forming on the makeshift dance floor. He moved with unexpected grace for such a tall man, guiding her through the steps with confidence. When the dance brought them together, his hand at her waist was respectful but firm, his eyes never leaving hers. "You dance well," he said as they circled each other. "My mother insisted I learn. She said every young lady should know how to dance, even in a frontier town." She was right. His smile made her heart skip. "Though I doubt she imagined you dancing at a church social in Truth or Consequences." Winifred laughed. "No, I expect not." They danced 2 more sets before taking a break for lemonade. As Foster went to fetch their drinks, Winifred became aware of Clara Wilson watching her from across the dance area, her expression calculating. A moment later, Clara approached, her pink dress rustling importantly. "You and Mr. James seem quite familiar," she said, her tone suggesting she found it improper. Winifred straightened her spine. "Mr. James has been very kind in helping me adjust to my new position." "Oh, I'm sure he has." Clara's smile was sharp. "I just wonder if you understand your position correctly. Foster James needs a wife of suitable background and connections, not a—" She paused delicately. "Not a housekeeper with no family or fortune." The words stung more than Winifred wanted to admit, perhaps because they echoed her own doubts. "I'm well aware of my position, Miss Wilson. Mr. James is my employer." "Good, so long as you remember that." Clara's gaze shifted and her expression brightened artificially. "Foster, we were just talking about you." Foster returned with 2 glasses of lemonade, his expression cooling noticeably as he handed one to Winifred. "Clara, I trust you're enjoying the social." "Immensely. I was just telling Miss Johnson how happy we all are that she's fitting in so well at the ranch." Clara placed a familiar hand on Foster's arm. "You must save me a dance, Foster, for old time's sake." After Clara sashayed away, Winifred took a long sip of lemonade, trying to quell the irrational jealousy rising in her chest. "Old times?" she asked, aiming for a casual tone and missing by a mile. Foster looked uncomfortable. "Clara's father and mine were friends. We grew up together, in a manner of speaking." He hesitated. "There was an understanding between our families at one point, but nothing formal, I see." Winifred kept her eyes on her glass. "She's very pretty. She's also shallow, manipulative, and interested primarily in my bank account." He touched Winifred's arm lightly, drawing her eyes back to his. "What did she say to upset you?" "Nothing that wasn't true," Winifred admitted. "She reminded me of my position." Foster's jaw tightened. "Your position is whatever you choose it to be, Winifred. Don't let Clara or anyone else tell you otherwise." Before she could respond, the band started up again, and Foster was obliged to honor his promise to dance with Clara. Winifred watched them, noting how Clara pressed closer than the dance required, her head tilted coyly as she spoke. Foster maintained a polite distance, his expression neutral, but Winifred couldn't help but think they made a handsome couple, the successful rancher and the well-bred local beauty. "Don't mind Clara," said a voice beside her. "She's been chasing Foster since they were children, but he's never shown any interest." Winifred turned to find Mrs. Henderson, the rancher's wife she'd met at lunch. "I'm not. That is, Mr. James and I are merely employer and employee." Mrs. Henderson's kind eyes crinkled with amusement. "Of course, dear. And the way he looks at you is exactly how every employer looks at his housekeeper." Winifred felt her cheeks flush. "Mrs. Henderson, call me Martha, please, and don't worry. Most of us are happy to see Foster taking an interest in someone. He's been alone too long, working that ranch and keeping to himself." She patted Winifred's hand. "Just be patient with him. James' men are stubborn creatures, slow to admit their feelings." The dance ended, and Foster returned to Winifred's side, looking relieved to be free of Clara. The rest of the afternoon passed pleasantly as they mingled with the townspeople, Winifred gradually relaxing, as she was accepted into conversations about local matters. Foster remained attentive, introducing her to business associates and neighbors, his hand occasionally resting lightly on the small of her back in a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. As the sun began to set, people started packing up to head home. Foster helped Winifred into the buggy, wrapping a light blanket around her shoulders against the evening chill. They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the horses knowing the way home without much guidance. "Did you enjoy yourself?" Foster finally asked. "I did, very much." "Thank you for taking me." Winifred hesitated, then added, "Though I think some people misunderstood our relationship." Foster glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. "Does that bother you?" I don't know," she admitted. "It's just that, as you pointed out when you hired me, I'm your employee. And after what happened with my father's debts, I can't afford to be the subject of gossip." "Winifred." Foster's voice was gentle. "No one who matters will think less of you for attending a church social with me. And if anyone suggests something improper, they'll answer to me." The protectiveness in his tone made her heart flutter traitorously. "It's not just that," she said, trying to be honest with him and with herself. "Clara Wilson said something that made me realize. Our worlds are very different, Foster. You're established here, respected. I'm a penniless woman who was nearly sold into servitude." Foster pulled the buggy to a stop, turning to face her fully. In the moonlight, his expression was serious, almost fierce. "Listen to me. What happened to you was not your fault. Your father's actions don't define you, and as for Clara Wilson," he shook his head in disgust. "She's jealous, Winifred, plain and simple." "Jealous? Of what?" For a long moment Foster just looked at her, something unspoken burning in his eyes. Then he said quietly, "Of the way I look at you, of the fact that I brought you to the social instead of her, of how much I enjoy your company." Winifred's breath caught. "Foster." "I know it's too soon," he said quickly. "You're still mourning your father, still adjusting to a new life. And I'm your employer, which complicates things. But I want you to know that I respect you, Winifred. More than respect. He trailed off, then shook his head. "I shouldn't say more now, it's not fair to you." He picked up the reins again, urging the horses forward, leaving Winifred with her thoughts in turmoil. What had he been about to say? And more importantly, what did she want him to say? As the ranch came into view, lights glowing welcomingly in the windows, Winifred realized with startling clarity that somewhere along the way, this place had begun to feel like home. And the man beside her had become someone she couldn't imagine her life without. The implications of that realization would have to wait for another day. For now, she simply allowed herself to enjoy the warmth of Foster's presence beside her as they returned to the ranch together. Life at the James Ranch settled into a comfortable routine in the weeks following the church social. Winifred threw herself into her duties, transforming the house room by room with small touches that made it feel more like a home. New curtains in the parlor, colorful quilts on the beds. Fresh flowers from the kitchen garden she had started with Alina's help all brought warmth and life to the once austere rooms. Foster noticed and appreciated the changes, often commenting on how much more welcoming the house felt. But there was a new tension between them since their conversation in the buggy, a careful distance that hadn't been there before. He was unfailingly polite, respectful, and frustratingly proper. "The man is in love with you," Alina declared one afternoon as she helped Winifred hang new curtains in the dining room. "Anyone with eyes can see it." Winifred nearly dropped her end of the curtain rod. "Alina, that's not. He's just kind," Alina snorted. "Kind, yes. But the way he watches you when you're not looking, that is not just kindness, Nina. Even if you're right and I'm not saying you are, it's complicated. I work for him. I have no family, no dowry, nothing to bring to a marriage except myself. And that is not enough." Alina's dark eyes were shrewd. "The señor, he has money enough for two. What he does not have is happiness, until you came." Winifred busied herself with adjusting the curtain's fall, unwilling to admit how much she wished Alina's words were true. "We barely know each other. Sometimes the heart knows quickly what the head takes time to accept." Alina stepped back to admire their work. "Perfect. Now I think the blue plates for dinner tonight, yes. The señor likes blue." That evening at dinner, served in the formal dining room as was the custom on Sundays, Winifred was acutely aware of Foster at the head of the table. He had complimented the new curtains and the table setting, his eyes lingering on her in a way that made her cheeks warm. "I received a letter from the bank today," he said as they finished the apple pie Miguel had made for dessert. "They've confirmed that all your father's debts have been officially settled." Winifred looked up in surprise. "But how? The auction only covered part of what he owed." Foster studied his coffee cup. "I took care of the rest." "Foster, that must have cost. I can't let you do that. It's already done." His tone was gentle but firm. "Consider it my gift to you, a clean slate, no more shadows from the past." Tears pricked at Winifred's eyes. "I don't know how to thank you. Your happiness is thanks enough." He cleared his throat. "Which brings me to something else I've been meaning to discuss with you. Would you join me in the parlor after dinner?" When they were settled in the newly comfortable parlor, Foster in his leather chair and Winifred on the sofa with its new cushions, he seemed uncharacteristically nervous. "Winifred, you've been here nearly a month now." "Yes," she said, uncertain where this was leading. "Is my work not satisfactory?" "Your work is exemplary. That's not what I wanted to discuss." He stood abruptly, moving to the window. "The fact is, I find myself in an awkward position. As your employer, I have certain responsibilities. As a man, I have other feelings." Winifred's heart began to race. "What are you saying, Foster?" He turned to face her, his expression earnest. "I'm saying that I care for you, Winifred, more than is appropriate for an employer, more than I expected to care for anyone again." She stood, hands clasped tightly before her. "I care for you too," she said softly. Relief and something deeper flashed across his face. "Then perhaps we should consider changing our arrangement." "What do you mean?" Foster took a step toward her. "I mean that I would like to court you properly, Winifred Johnson. Not as my housekeeper, but as the woman I—" He hesitated. "As the woman I'm coming to love." The word hung in the air between them, powerful and terrifying and wonderful. Winifred felt dizzy with the rush of emotions it evoked. But what would people say? "Clara Wilson already thinks—" "I don't give a damn what Clara Wilson thinks," Foster said with unexpected vehemence. "Or anyone else for that matter. All I care about is what you think, what you want." "What I want," Winifred repeated slowly. What did she want? Security, yes. Respect, certainly. But as she looked at Foster James, with his earnest blue eyes and the vulnerability written across his usually composed features, She knew it was much simpler than that. "I want you," she said finally. "I want this us, whatever that might mean." The smile that broke across Foster's face was like sunrise. He closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "Then may I have permission to court you, Miss Johnson, with honorable intentions?" Winifred couldn't help but smile at his formal phrasing. "Yes, Mr. James, you may." He raised one of her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent a shiver through her entire body. "Thank you," he said simply. "What happens now?" Winifred asked, suddenly uncertain about the practical aspects of their new relationship. "Now," Foster said, "we take our time getting to know each other properly. You'll remain as housekeeper for now. Your position and wages won't change. But we'll also spend time together as a courting couple." He smiled. "Rides, picnics, evenings reading together. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready for more, you'll tell me." The respect and consideration in his plan touched Winifred deeply. "That sounds perfect." They spent the rest of the evening talking, sharing stories from their pasts, discovering common interests and amusing differences in their views. When finally they said goodnight, Foster walked her to the foot of the stairs, once again raising her hand to his lips. "Good night, Winifred. Sleep well." "Good night, Foster." As she climbed the stairs, Winifred felt lighter than she had in years, as if a burden she hadn't even fully acknowledged had been lifted from her shoulders. Whatever came next, she would face it with Foster James at her side, not as her employer or her savior, but as her partner. The thought carried her into dreams filled with promise and possibility. The following weeks were a revelation to Winifred. Foster was true to his word about courting her properly, finding small ways to show his affection while maintaining a respectful distance. He brought her wildflowers gathered during his rides around the ranch, sat with her in the evenings while she sewed and he read aloud, and took her on Sunday drives in the buggy to show her the beauty of the surrounding countryside. With each passing day, Winifred found herself falling deeper in love with not just the man, but the life they were building together. The ranch began to feel truly like home, and she took pride in the improvements she made to the house, now with an eye toward its future, their future. One particularly fine Saturday in early October, Foster suggested they pack a picnic and ride to his favorite spot on the ranch, a small plateau overlooking the valley, with mountains rising in the distance. "It's where I go to think," he told her as they spread a blanket under a lone pine tree. "I've never brought anyone else here before." The simple admission touched Winifred deeply. "Thank you for sharing it with me." They ate the lunch Miguel had packed: cold chicken, fresh bread, apple tarts, talking easily about ranch matters and Winifred's plans for preserving the last of the garden's harvest. When they had finished, Foster leaned back against the tree trunk, stretching his long legs before him. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you," he said, his tone more serious. "About my father." Winifred settled beside him, close but not touching. "I'm listening." Foster was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "My father was not a good man," he began. "He was successful in business, built this ranch from nothing, but he was cruel. To my mother, to the workers, to me." He picked up a pine cone, turning it in his hands. "After my mother died, he became worse, drinking, gambling, taking out his anger on anyone nearby." Winifred remained silent, sensing he needed to tell this story in his own way. "When I was 17, he bought Maria's contract, the Mexican woman I told you about. She was educated from a good family in Santa Fe that had fallen on hard times. My father." Foster's jaw tightened. "He treated her like property, worse than property. I tried to help her, to protect her, but I was young, and he was still stronger than me." "Oh, Foster," Winifred said softly, her heart aching for both the young woman and the boy he had been. After 2 years, she couldn't take it anymore. He swallowed hard. She walked into the creek during spring floods. They found her body 3 miles downstream. Winifred reached for his hand, holding it tightly. I confronted my father that night. We physically fought. I was 19 by then, nearly as big as he was. I told him I was going to the sheriff, going to tell everyone what he'd done, what kind of man he really was. Foster's voice had dropped to barely more than a whisper. He laughed at me. Said no one would believe me, that men had the right to do what they wanted with their property, whether that property was land, cattle, or women. That's terrible, Winifred said, feeling ill. I was so angry. I told him I was leaving, that I wanted no part of him or his ranch. I was packing my things when I heard the gunshot. Foster closed his eyes briefly. He'd shot himself in his office, left a note saying the ranch was mine and that I'd better make something of myself or he'd find a way to make me pay even from the grave. Foster, I'm so sorry. Winifred moved closer, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. What an awful burden to place on you. For years, I thought about selling the ranch, getting as far away from here as possible. But then I realized this land didn't belong to my father. It belongs to the mountains, the sky, the creatures that live here, and I could make it something better than he ever imagined. He turned to her, his eyes intense. When I saw you on that auction block, Winifred, it was like seeing Maria all over again. I couldn't stand by and let another woman suffer that fate, not if I could prevent it. You did more than prevent it, Winifred said softly. You gave me a home, a purpose, and now, Foster prompted when she hesitated. And now happiness, she finished, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. You've given me happiness, Foster. He raised a hand to her cheek, his touch gentle as a whisper. You've given me the same, Winifred, more than I ever thought possible. Their eyes held, and Winifred knew he was going to kiss her a moment before he leaned forward. His lips met hers softly at first, a question rather than a demand. When she responded, moving closer and sliding a hand to his shoulder, the kiss deepened, becoming an answer, a promise. When they finally drew apart, Foster rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said simply. I think I've loved you since I first saw you standing so brave and defiant on that auction block. I love you too, Winifred replied, the words coming easily now that they'd been set free. More than I thought possible after everything that happened. They stayed on the plateau until the sun began to sink toward the horizon, talking, kissing, planning a future neither had dared to imagine just months before. As they rode back to the ranch, side by side, Winifred felt a certainty she had never known before. This was where she belonged, with this man on this land. That evening, as they sat in the parlor after dinner, Foster took her hand. There's something I want to ask you, he said, his voice serious but his eyes warm. You can say no if it's too soon. Winifred's heart quickened. What is it? The cattle buyers from Kansas City will be here next week. After that, I need to go to Santa Fe for some business with the bank and the territorial offices. He hesitated. It would mean being away for at least 2 weeks, and I find I don't want to be apart from you that long. What are you suggesting? Come with me, he said. To Santa Fe. We could. That is, if you're willing. We could be married there, start our journey home as husband and wife. Winifred's breath caught. Are you proposing to me, Foster James? He smiled, reaching into his pocket to pull out a small velvet box. I suppose I am, though not very elegantly. He opened the box to reveal a ring with a modest diamond flanked by sapphires. This was my mother's. She made me promise to give it only to a woman I truly loved, a woman of strength and kindness and intelligence. His eyes met hers. A woman like you. Tears blurred Winifred's vision as she looked at the ring, then at the man offering it to her. Yes, she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I will marry you." Foster slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms for a kiss that sealed their engagement with all the promise of their future together. When they separated, both breathless and smiling, he kept her close. "I want you to have everything, Winifred. The wedding of your dreams, a home filled with love, a family if you want one. Whatever would make you happy." Winifred looked around the parlor at the curtains she had sewn, the flowers she had arranged, the books they had read together by lamplight, and then back at Foster, his beloved face alight with joy and hope. "I already have everything that matters," she said truthfully. "I have you." The preparations for their trip to Santa Fe and subsequent wedding consumed the next week. News of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch and into town, met mostly with congratulations and well wishes. Even Clara Wilson, when they encountered her at the general store, managed a tight smile and perfunctory congratulations, though her eyes told a different story. "Don't mind her," Foster said as they drove back to the ranch. "Clara always believed she'd end up mistress of the James Ranch. It's a hard dream to let go." "I can't really blame her," Winifred admitted. "You're quite a catch, Mr. James," she smiled teasingly. "Am I now?" he returned her smile. "And here I thought I was the lucky one, Miss Johnson." The cattle buyers arrived as expected, and Foster spent long days negotiating the sale of his prime stock. Winifred used the time to prepare for their trip, ordering a new dress for the wedding, a simple but elegant cream-colored gown with lace trim, and packing her few belongings for the journey. Elena was overjoyed at the news of their engagement, hugging Winifred tightly and declaring, "I knew from the first day, Nina. The way he looked at you like a man seeing the sun for the first time after a long winter." Miguel was equally pleased, promising a feast for their return that would make the angels jealous. The ranch hands, too, offered hearty congratulations, though Pete couldn't resist adding, "About time the boss found himself a wife. Maybe now he'll stop being so picky about how we fold the blankets in the bunkhouse." The night before their departure for Santa Fe, Foster and Winifred sat on the porch swing he had built for her, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against him in a posture of comfortable intimacy they had gradually adopted in the weeks since their engagement. "Are you nervous?" he asked, his voice soft in the quiet evening. "About the wedding?" "No," Winifred smiled up at him. "About becoming a rancher's wife, mistress of all this?" "A little. You've been running this house for months already and doing a far better job than I ever did." "It's different as a wife than as a housekeeper," she pointed out. "People will expect different things from me." Foster's arm tightened around her. "The only expectations that matter are mine, and all I expect is for you to be yourself, the woman I fell in love with." Winifred nestled closer to him. "When I think about where I was just a few months ago and where I am now, it seems impossible. Like a dream I might wake from." "Not a dream," Foster assured her, "and if it is, I'm having the same one." He kissed the top of her head. "We should get some rest. We have an early start tomorrow." As they stood to go inside, Winifred turned to look once more at the ranch spread out below them, the moon casting silver light over the buildings and pastures. "I never thought I'd find a home like this," she said softly. "A place where I belong so completely." Foster took her hand, raising it to his lips. "Welcome home, Winifred James," he said. "Almost Mrs. James," he corrected himself with a smile. "I like the sound of that," she said, and followed him into the house toward their future together. The journey to Santa Fe took 3 days by stagecoach, with stops at small towns and way stations along the route. Foster had arranged for them to have the coach to themselves, a luxury that allowed them to talk freely, and enjoy the changing landscape as they traveled north and east. By the time they arrived in the territorial capital, Winifred was both exhausted from the jolting ride and exhilarated by the adventure. Santa Fe was unlike any place she had ever been, a fascinating blend of Spanish, Mexican, and American influences reflected in its architecture, food, and the diverse people who filled its streets. Foster had reserved rooms for them at the finest hotel, where they would stay separately until after the wedding. "I have business at the bank tomorrow morning," he told her as they parted at her door. "But the afternoon is ours. I thought we might visit the church, make arrangements with the priest, and perhaps find you some flowers for the ceremony." "That sounds perfect," Winifred said, suddenly shy at the thought of their impending marriage. Despite their closeness over the past weeks, they had maintained certain boundaries, saving the final intimacy for after their vows. Now, standing at the threshold of her hotel room, the reality of what the next day would bring washed over her in a wave of nervous anticipation. Foster seemed to sense her thoughts. He leaned down to kiss her gently. "Sleep well, my love. Tomorrow begins our life together." The wedding took place 2 days later in the small chapel attached to the cathedral in Santa Fe. It was a simple ceremony, with only the priest, his assistant, and an elderly couple Foster had befriended on previous visits to the city as witnesses. Winifred wore her new cream dress with a small bouquet of local wildflowers Foster had gathered for her that morning. He looked handsome in his best suit, his face solemn but his eyes alight with joy as they spoke their vows. "I, Foster James, take thee, Winifred Johnson, to be my lawfully wedded wife." As they exchanged rings, a simple gold band to accompany her engagement ring, and a matching one for Foster, Winifred felt a profound sense of rightness, as if all the paths of her life had been leading to this moment, this man, this commitment. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the priest declared. "You may kiss the bride." Foster's kiss was tender but held a promise of passion to come, causing Winifred to blush as they turned to receive congratulations from their small audience. They celebrated with a fine dinner at the hotel, then retired to the bridal suite Foster had arranged. As the door closed behind them, leaving them truly alone together for the first time, Winifred felt a flutter of nerves despite her love and trust for her new husband. Foster sensed her anxiety and took her hands in his. "We have all the time in the world, Winifred. Nothing needs to happen that you're not ready for." His consideration brought tears to her eyes. "It's not that I'm not ready," she said softly. "It's just new, unknown." "For me as well," he admitted. "Despite what you might think, I haven't. That is, there hasn't been anyone since." "Since Maria," Winifred guessed gently. He nodded. "I couldn't bear to be like my father, taking what wasn't freely given. And after what happened to her, I couldn't bring myself to." He trailed off, then met her eyes directly. "You're the first woman I've loved, Winifred, the only woman I've ever wanted to build a life with." His confession melted away her nervousness, replacing it with a deep tenderness. "Show me, Foster," she whispered, stepping closer to him. "Show me how to be your wife in every way." That night, they discovered each other with reverence and growing passion, learning together the mysteries of physical love. Foster was gentle, patient, putting her pleasure before his own, and by the time they lay entwined in the aftermath, Winifred knew that this, too, was a kind of coming home. "I love you, Mrs. James," Foster murmured against her hair as they drifted toward sleep. "And I love you, Mr. James," she replied, safe in the circle of his arms, certain that whatever challenges life might bring, they would face them together. Their honeymoon in Santa Fe lasted a week, during which Foster completed his business dealings in the mornings while Winifred explored the shops and markets. In the afternoons, They visited local sites together: the palace of the governors, the old church, the surrounding hills with their spectacular views. Each night, they returned to their suite to discover new dimensions of their love for each other, growing more confident and attuned to each other's desires. By the time they boarded the stagecoach for the return journey, Winifred felt transformed, no longer a frightened young woman sold to pay her father's debts, but a confident wife with a future bright with promise. The return trip seemed shorter somehow, filled with plans and dreams for their life together. Foster talked of improvements to the ranch house, of breeding a special line of horses, of the children they might have running around the yard someday. Winifred shared her visions for a larger garden, perhaps a small orchard, and definitely a library room where they could store the books Foster had been collecting, and those they would add together over the years. As the stagecoach crested the final ridge and the James Ranch came into view, Winifred felt a surge of emotion. "It looks different somehow," she said, leaning forward to see better. Foster smiled. "That's because it's no longer just my ranch. It's our home now." They were greeted with cheers and congratulations from the ranch hands, Alina and Miguel, who had prepared a welcome feast as promised. The house itself had been decorated with wildflowers and ribbon, and a hand-painted sign over the door read, "Welcome home, Mr. and Mrs. James." That night, as they lay together in the master bedroom, now their shared room, Foster traced lazy patterns on Winifred's bare shoulder. "Happy, Mrs. James. Happier than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully, pressing a kiss to his chest. "And you?" "I have everything I ever wanted and more," he said, pulling her closer. "A beautiful wife, a prosperous ranch, and a future full of possibilities." Winter settled over the ranch, bringing shorter days and longer nights spent by the fire, reading aloud or simply talking as snow piled up outside. Christmas was celebrated with a tree Foster, and some of the hands cut from the foothills, decorated with paper ornaments Winifred made and strung with popcorn and cranberries. They exchanged simple gifts: a new hat she had ordered from the catalog for him, a delicate silver locket containing a lock of his hair for her. As winter gave way to spring, Winifred began to suspect that another gift was on its way. Her suspicions were confirmed by the local doctor during a trip to town, and she spent the ride home planning how to tell Foster the news. She found him in the barn, checking on a mare about to foal, his sleeves rolled up as he spoke soothingly to the nervous animal. "Everything all right?" she asked, leaning against the stall door. Foster smiled at her. "Just fine. She's progressing normally. Should be another hour or so." "Perhaps you'll have 2 new arrivals to welcome soon," Winifred said, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her still flat abdomen. It took Foster a moment to understand her meaning. When he did, his eyes widened and he was at her side in 2 strides, hands gentle on her shoulders. "Winifred, are you saying?" She nodded, her eyes filling with happy tears. "Dr. Patterson confirms it. We're going to have a baby, Foster. In late October, he thinks." Foster's whoop of joy startled the mare, who snorted in protest. He lifted Winifred off her feet in a careful embrace, then set her down just as quickly. "I'm sorry. Should I not do that? Are you feeling well? You need to rest." Winifred laughed at his sudden protectiveness. "I'm perfectly fine, Foster. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, you know." "Yes, but not my wife, not carrying my child." His voice was filled with wonder as he placed a hand over hers on her stomach. "Our child." That night, lying beside her sleeping husband, Winifred reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here. From the humiliation of the auction block to the joy of impending motherhood, from a woman with no future to one whose life stretched before her rich with promise, it was almost too much to comprehend. "Thank you," she whispered to whatever power had guided her path to intersect with Foster's. "Thank you for bringing us together." As if hearing her in his dreams, Foster turned toward her, his arm instinctively drawing her close, protecting her even in sleep. Winifred nestled against him, content in the knowledge that she had found not just freedom, but a love strong enough to heal the wounds of the past and build a future filled with hope. In the years that followed, the James Ranch prospered along with its owners. Foster's breeding program produced horses sought after throughout the territory, while Winifred's gardens became famous for their beauty and productivity. Their son, William Gerald James, arrived as predicted in October, a healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's quiet determination. 2 years later, twins Robert and Richard joined the family, bringing joyful chaos to the ranch house. Foster proved to be a devoted father, spending hours teaching the boys to ride, fish, and respect the land that would one day be theirs. Winifred balanced motherhood with her duties as the ranch mistress, finding in each role a fulfillment she had never imagined possible. As the century drew to a close, the family gathered on the porch of the ranch house, now expanded to accommodate their growing family, to watch the sunset over the land that had witnessed their journey from strangers to beloved partners. William, now 10, sat on the steps whittling a piece of wood, while the 7-year-old twins chased fireflies in the yard. Foster's arm rested comfortably around Winifred's shoulders, his fingers absently playing with a strand of her hair, now streaked with a few strands of silver. "Do you ever think about that day?" Winifred asked softly. The auction, Foster was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes," he admitted. "I think about how close I came to missing you if I'd been delayed on the trail, if I'd decided to take a different route home. But you weren't. You didn't." Winifred leaned into his embrace. "You found me when I needed you most." "And you found me," Foster replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "A man who didn't know he was lost until you showed him the way home." As darkness fell over the ranch, the family moved inside to the warmth of the fire and the comfort of being together. And if the ghost of a young woman named Maria smiled down on them from somewhere beyond, pleased that her tragedy had led in its way to such happiness, well, that was a fitting conclusion to a story that had begun in despair, but found its way, against all odds, to love.